Wholeness, welcome. This is Josh of Integrating Presence, Inner Skilled. And today I have Elizabeth Makepeace with me. Elizabeth, how's it going today?
It's going really well. It's early in the morning here in Australia, but it's Friday.
Well, that's very cool. Thanks for getting up so early and joining me today here in the middle of the country and in mid-America here. Um, who is Elizabeth Makepeace and what kind of work does she do?
So I I suppose the easiest way to explain is that I'm a healer. That's one of the things that most people resonate to, though I don't see myself as a healer anymore. 28 years I've been working in this spiritual realm. Um, I've had so many different experiences from, three shooting stars when I first asked the universe, am I on the right track and I'm not working for the wrong side, to breathing through a 4.5 centimeter brain tumor, um, and meeting the love of my life on the beach. My maiden name was Payne, Payne, and his last name was Makepeace, or is Makepeace, right? And so when you're totally aligned with what your soul's destiny is, those things become commonplace. They're not coincidences, they're not miracles, they're just part of the way you live your life. And so one of the things that I do is I support people to stop healing and move into creating, because we have had so much, like I think consciousness was at that place in, from the 60s and into, the 2020s or whatever. By just recently, I'd say in the last 10 years, we've moved from constantly looking at ourselves as broken and doing all the shadow work and rebirthing and all of the things. It's just a cesspit of, like until the beginning of time, we're going to find things that are a distortion, right? So it's moving out of the place of having to fix ourselves and to recognize that we are already whole. We're already creating, and now let's focus on what we want to create instead of just being asleep and creating from our unconscious.
Beautifully put. Just had a guest on before this. It's echoing similar things. And there's teacher I respect, used to follow his work more, Matt Kahn. And yeah, basically he's saying that, if you keep healing, then his metaphor is like the universe will give you more of that. So, oh,
Mm.
you like healing? Okay, well, I'll give you more things to heal, And so if people build an identity around that, right? Or, they find a sense of self-worth, then, we can see maybe where that's going to go, or maybe it's too superstitious, but I don't know. But having things to heal. Yeah.
It,
What do you
it,
say about?
it's actually an interesting process, because our unconscious is constantly wanting to survive, right? That's its job. That's what its role is. It's a muscle, oh, sorry, it's a memory storage unit of all the things that we have experienced, not only in this life, but, energetically through our DNA, in our soul lineage, in our past lives, all of those things. And so it gets repetitive loops. So as soon as you go into a process of, I have to look for something to heal and that I'm broken, it goes into the pattern of, I've found that thing, I'm now healed, but there's something else to it. It just naturally wants to go back and gravitate to look for more things. And because it is from the beginning of time, is going to constantly find stuff, because it's actually always searching for how to find our wholeness instead of just experiencing ourselves as whole. is going to constantly look for the cracks.
Yeah, and I definitely think it needs a different approach. Now, let's clarify. We're not talking about like serious things that need healed from, like if somebody has like like a physical accident, or something happens. We're talking more kind of like, I don't know, metaphorically, or yeah, the sense that something's not right, something's I'm not. I need to be something else. I need to be more. I need to do more. Um, or I don't know. Yeah, how we reframe. I just wanted to make clear
It's
that we're not. You talked a little bit about it, but we're not talking about things that it would be obvious that you need to heal from, right? We're not talking about that. We're not talking about like a huge physical
well,
ailment or something, right? Or
yeah, well, it's interesting because this is the dichotomy of life, right? Is it that you had an experience that was physical so that you could correct a soul experience that, like something that your soul came here to experience? Uh, or have you had a permanent physical dis-ease? So, like, actually, all of it is that your soul is here to correct something, right? Like, where our soul is here to experience ourselves as whole. So, when we have something, for example, just say you have a permanent accident, you're in a car accident or something like that, and you're become a paraplegic, or, something major like that, that part, that experience is for you to rectify something within the spirit, the mind, to actually just still see yourself as whole, even though your body is not the same as everybody else. Like, look at all the, different uh, dysfunctions, or, you know, uh, labels that we've got, from ADHD to autism to, all of the things. All of these things are an opportunity for us to recognize that we're here to experience, right? We're not going to all be the same. We're here as a variety of different souls experiencing as a consciousness, as a collective consciousness, right? And so when we have those experiences, how are we handling those experiences? What is our mind telling us about ourselves? What are we feeling about ourselves, others, and the world? Like, all of those things come into play. Because, can I just share quickly about my brain tumor? Uh,
yes, please, yes.
yeah, it was quite an interesting process, because I had 12 months of symptoms, and I'm a bit stubborn, right? Like, I'm not one to go and get something checked out straight away. In fact, actually, in my defense, I was looking after my mum, and she was, very close to going into a nursing home. And I had been with her to a doctor, and I was just on the start of having these symptoms of, like, a little bit of pressure in my head, and I mentioned it to her doctor, and she said, "Oh, it doesn't sound like anything medical." Well, I was a massage therapist for 25 years, so that's enough for me to say, "Oh, okay, maybe it's, my atlas, which is the first vertebrae, maybe it's this, maybe it's that." So I start going to a massage therapist and chiropractic and acupuncture, and well, 12 months later, I have done the gamut. I'm like, oh, maybe this is my version of menopause. So I went and did herbal medicine, and um, you name it, I did. I even went to a functional dentist thinking that my jaw was out, or anyway, got to this point. I cleaned up my diet. I'd done water therapy, and that had stopped the pain, for a couple of months. And I had this moment where I didn't realize, but it was that I was close to having, like, fainting in the street. And my daughter had a go at me, "Mum, just go to the doctor and find out what it is, and then you can do your stuff," right? So again, it happened the next day, and I was by myself, and I went, okay, I need to do something. Well, from that moment on, because of the alignment that I have spent, more than 28 years in the process of becoming myself, understanding my presence, being connected to this inner wisdom, right? Like whatever this intelligence is that we are all part of, my whole journey has been to listen to that. And so through the process is just this magic happened. Like I rang up the first doctor I could find that was the closest. It was just on the edges of COVID. And, you couldn't get into doctors and there was all this stuff. Well, I got into a doctor straight away that day, just happened to go to a doctor that had done 4 years in neurosurgery prior to being GP. So he picked it up straight away. He said, there's something right, you've got to go and have a CT scan the next day. Had a CT scan. They, rang me up and said, you've got to go to emergency, like now. And it was like straight away I just went, oh, bugger. There was no fear. There was nothing. It was just like, oh, that's what's going on. They told me to pack my bags because there wasn't going to be a neurosurgeon in emergency on a Friday afternoon. Well, who turns up but a neurosurgeon? They check me out and they say, how does someone like you have a piece of fruit in your head? You should be having seizures, blackouts, coordination and balance issues, and you've got headaches. They let me go home. Monday I went into the hospital. I forgot my chemical-free, clean, shampoo and conditioner and everything. Walk into the toilets and showers, and someone had left their Manuka honey shampoo and conditioner, so I was able to use that. Everything. There was so many little pieces, including I had to have 3 months off my business, and I got a 5-figure payout in my account just come out of the blue into my account. The last nurse I saw, her name was Angel. The first nurse I opened my eyes to, her name was Crystal. It was just no pain. The surgeon said she opened my head up and it popped out. There was no follow-up treatment. There was nothing. It was just flow after flow after flow. That was my experience because it's been a long period of time that I've been developing this connection. However, when you have something going on, and if it's health related or physically related, it's so important to tap in to that inner knowing, to that creator energy and say, okay, I'm here, I'm listening. What's this all about? What do I need to clear? What do I need to align to? And just follow the directions of your internal voice, regardless of what's going on outside.
Well, speaking of internal voice and what's going on outside, it's an interesting little scenario I'm in here, but it's great. It's rolling with it. So, yeah, just I guess people who are listening to this, they immediately kind of know and relate and resonate with what you're saying, right? And in fact, there were some times in my life where when the synchronicities stopped, then first they started to get so much they got weird and they freaked me out a little bit. But then it's the other way around. When they stopped, then I'm like, okay, what's going on here? Why aren't there enough synchronicities going on? Something kind of like that. But this is I think a lot of people though that aren't into the kind of things we're into, they'll freak out at something like that, and rightfully so. I mean, if people haven't been kind of prepared or doing, I guess, inner work, or I don't know what you can attribute it to. So yeah, I don't know if we need to include that level, or that's okay too, because they're just where they're at. Everybody, we meet people where they're at, I guess, too. So maybe you can address that as well. And if I can, I want to transition into kind of one of the reasons I brought you on too. You mentioned getting out of a cult. And I think this is a fascinating thing. I've been listening to quite a few really severe survivor stories on a few podcasts, right? And there's some people that have gone through horrendous amounts of trauma. And I'm not trauma informed, but I see this as something very vital in society now. Some people might think it's too fringe or that it's not going on a lot. And I don't know about that. But what I do hear is a lot of different commonalities. And so it would be kind of wild to think that all these people are making the kind of the same things up. I'm not putting it past that. But I'm, why I find this significant is because of like a trickle down effect, that if there's some human beings that are experiencing severe, and I'm not relating this to you. Sorry, so I don't know what you've gone through until you shared your story. I don't know why I'm associating or just it reminds me of what I've been witnessing survivor stories. So, you know, can it be the case that really severe trauma affects the human population because of the collective conscious and the collective unconscious, and what to do about it? You know, some of the most horrendous things that have happened, not to get stuck into darkness, but also how to view this properly, what to do about it, and how to move beyond it. I think I would like to get your take on that. And I don't know how you want to address this. If you want to talk about your experience with a cult first, or however you want to address these two things I'm interested in here.
Yeah, it's a big topic, right? And what really my experience with the cult is nothing compared to what some people have experienced. It was very cult like, but it was so mild, and it was just part of my journey. It was so mild compared to I've also heard some horrendous stories, and in my opinion, so for me, what happened was I was just completely innocent. I I was young, I was naive. I had grown up in a family where uh, talking about conditioning, like the way the unconscious wants to stay stuck in constantly fixing. The unconscious doesn't want to change, and the unconscious is caught up in the way it was developed as a child. From 0 to 3, we are like little sponges. Our brainwave frequency is the same as if we were being hypnotized. So everything that we see, hear, energetically experience, we absorb all of it, and it's sort of programming us to understand how to function in the world. One of the things that I say to my clients is, in a house full of thieves, it's the child that doesn't want to steal that gets into trouble, right? Because every single person in that family has a certain pattern, and if you go out of that, that's when you get into trouble, right? Or you're seen as different. And so for me, I was raised in a family of I don't feel like I don't belong, and I was constantly told that no, you didn't see that, you didn't experience that, this is what you experienced. And so never really encouraged to listen to my intuition or the internal voice or anything like that. It was always influenced outside, which is a lot of us, right? Because we actually come into a world, excuse me, we come into a world where before we were born, we're in this beautiful place where we don't have to do anything, right? Like in the womb, we're just warm, we're being fed, no clothes, we're just enjoying the experience. And then as soon as that umbilical cord's cut, we've got to breathe air, which is external to us. We've got to have food external to us. We've got to have warmth external to us, love external to us. So everything is being conditioned for us to be separate, to recognize ourselves as we need something external to us. So fast forward to, single mum, just separated from an alcoholic, abusive relationship, getting my shit together basically. And I go to a psychic, and the psychic says, well, you can do what I do, but obviously you don't know it. And I have these weird experiences, like, my dad touches me on the cheek. My dad died when I was 15. 3 days of things touching me, and I've got no idea what's going on, and she won't let me go back. So here I am, left to my own devices, don't know anyone that's had this experience. Go to a meditation circle, because where do you go when you've got this sort of thing happening? And within, I think, about a month, I'd met a guy who sort of started sharing stuff with me, and he sort of encouraged me to come to a workshop. And this woman was doing past life regression, and had all this amazing information that was way over my head and had no idea. I went and had a regression, and she's like, I was waiting for someone to turn up, and I knew that someone new was going to come, and you walked in the door and I knew it was you, right? So she got me as a blank slate. I had no spiritual knowledge. I had no information, like no history about anything. And we started doing regression work, and she was writing a book, and taking people through regressions and writing this beautiful book, right? Well, 7 years of being part of that process, and for 5 of the years I was in a different location. So I was like an hour and a half away from the other 5 in the group. But when I went up and started living closer, I started seeing these signs. And as we progressed all together, she moved into, instead of just a facilitator, she moved into starting to see herself as the mother of creation. And and so she wanted us to start talking about us being disciples, and that she was the mother of Jesus, and blah, 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 right? Now, I had watched her grow. She'd become part of my family. I was sort of very much invested. And yet, luckily, that part of me that was innocent, it had enough innocence to say, I don't know if I believe this. And so I questioned, and I questioned what she was doing. And I didn't quite jump in like the others were, and all the way through, because of that, I can see now that it was me personally growing and spiritually growing and being contained, so that I could spiritually grow. But what happened was, it got to this point where, she was spending all the money on things like going down and seeing her family and saying she was going to do a workshop. And there was just all these little things. And she was smoking cigarettes, and she was like, oh, this is so that people can judge me and I can pick up their judgment. And she had an answer and excuse for everything. But they got to this point where I questioned her, and she, really just jumped in and got the whole group behind her, and basically said that I had this dark goddess that was infiltrating my field, was, blanketing the consciousness of the whole group and creating seeds of doubt, but not only just the group, the whole world, right? Well, again, in my innocence, I sort of went, well, she wanted me to have another session to get rid of this dark goddess. And I said, well, if, I've been working with you for 7 years now, if I can't get rid of this by myself, there's something wrong with your teachings. I now look back and go, oh, that was pretty, that was pretty, saucy to be able to do that, because I didn't really have the, that sort of um, angst in me, or the guts or whatever to stand up for myself. I didn't realize that that's what I was doing, and yeah, it was quite an interesting process because I then separated from the group, and they were constantly, ringing me up, and she was sending me emails to say that if I didn't work this out, I'd have to have another 250 lifetimes to get to this point again. And it was the hardest thing that I've ever been through, is to separate from that community, because they were my family, and all of my spiritual teachings had come through this woman. And I had done, I now say it's 7 years of past life regression training, because it was, there was this dichotomy, because she was my teacher, but also I was learning directly from spirit, and I was stripping all of this stuff from my body, all of the, past lives, all of the, old patterns of behavior. But to answer, so, I ended up being able to separate from that group. And so it was afterwards, in the process of really having to hold my spiritual belief that I was doing the right thing, and that even if I had to do another 250 lifetimes, that I was prepared to do it, to really stand in my truth. And as I, took the 12 months that it took to really own myself and my truth, and that this was the right decision, I recognized that, yeah, I was in a mini cult, and that I had people outside go, yeah, we actually checked out what she was doing because you were there. We were wondering why you were there, So mine, if anyone here is listening and has been in a cult situation, you'd be laughing at my one, because it doesn't have that same depth to a lot of the trauma that some people have been through, right? But getting back to the whole experience of cult energy, when you can you consider where we are, if you step beyond that and look from a higher perspective, we are moving from one level of consciousness as a society into a whole new level of consciousness. We have been for years, hundreds of years, developing, almost you could consider an unconscious, like if we were looking at the body of humanity, we have been in the unconscious programming of being conditioned that there is some one energy that is outside of us, and that's what we've been conditioned to believe. There's this one energy outside of us that is going to save us in some way, because we are broken. And so we've had many people come through and try to say, I'm the one. I'm the one. I'm the one. And so as a collective, we gravitate towards what feels like truth. And we've got this unconscious pattern of looking and searching for a higher understanding. And so through that process, we're always searching. But we're being conditioned. You look at society, you could say society is a big cult, because there's conditioning over and over again of how to, live your life and watch TV and be on social media and buy that soft drink and that, food and all of those things, right? We're being conditioned in one way or another. But as we shift into a new level of consciousness, and we're sort of in that gap at the moment where we're moving from being controlled, for want of a better way, or programmed and conditioned, where people are starting to wake up and recognize that actually that one consciousness is internal. That one consciousness is actually who we are, and we've all got access to it internally, not externally. And so through that process, as more and more people wake up to that, it doesn't mean that we're going to have this, radical rebellion. What it means is the more we understand that we are the one, we recognize that you are the one too. And now we've got this collective connection where we see that, I'm just experiencing the oneness within me as a woman, right, in Australia, as a healer, and you're experiencing it over in America, like feeding chickens and doing things that, like we've just got a different experience and coming from a different viewpoint, but it's the same thing. And that's when things are going to start shifting. And so when people gravitate to cults, they're I feel like it's a soul correction, like potentially something that has been lifetimes of having the same experience. And it's the opportunity to, we go into these dark experiences or shadow experiences so that we can recognize ourselves as the light. And so, those things can be extremely traumatic depending on what your soul is here to experience and how conscious you are of letting go of those experiences, or self-aware to, I'm gonna, that whole experience for me was 7 years. It was not traumatic. I've had traumatic experiences, but every single experience I've had, I've grown from. And so I would never say that they were wrong, that I shouldn't have had them, that I did the wrong thing. They were part of who I am because I've grown and developed as a human being and as a soul, right?
It's there's quite a bit to say, so I don't know if I agree that abuse is okay. I don't think abuse is ever okay, actually. Now, afterwards, yeah, and that's not what you mean, right? It's if something happens and afterwards, how are we going to view it? Are we going to stay in victim mentality the rest of our lives and think that's going to help us, and play the victim card, but not also to shame victims either? That's not helpful either. It's about the choice we have now. How are we going to view it? What are we going to do if we need boundaries, and how to enforce boundaries if something like that is needed? And then, how do we respond to it? That it's like I keep referring to this golden question of, what if the worst things that happened to me were the greatest gift I've ever been given? So we've been talking, or you've been talking, and I have to a little bit about, I would say, a divinity path, And while I'm familiar with the divinity path, or some of the things on it, I do study and practice more Buddhist stuff. And, what the Buddhists might say is action, intentionality in action. So it's not to get hung up on our past actions that don't happen randomly, that aren't without effect, with if we do things with intentionality, if we do skillful things intentionally, they're going to have more than likely skillful results, and vice versa, but the rub is to not get hung up on our what the choices we've made in the past, but it's that we now have an opportunity to do something different, and it matters, and it will have if we act skillfully with intention, then it tends to have a skillful outcome. So that's how I look at this, and causes and conditions. I do kind of see more the divinity path about, coming here to experience things, but this, to see and verify this for myself is beyond my current capability of knowing exactly like this. I'm not denying it. I'm not saying it's not a possibility. I'm just saying with right now, what I have to work with is how am I viewing this and how am I responding to it? That's going to be for my welfare and for the welfare of all beings everywhere, potentially, and especially in the long term, right? So this is kind of more how I view things like this. But yeah, and we do have the choice, it seems, to what we pay attention to and how we pay attention to it, because as the old, most cliche saying goes, where attention goes, energy flows, right? And yeah, this notion of our innocence too. I mean, it's one of the lessons I learned with devastation, because one of the gifts of devastation is that it can reveal deep truths within us. And one of the things that came out in a devastation I had was that I was neglecting my innocence, that I wanted to grow up really quick, that I kind of looked down. I was confusing innocence for naivety and stupidity,
Mm,
and they're completely different, you know? And
absolutely.
so that was a huge turning point that was so helpful to see that clearly. Just like another huge confusion I was making is self-confidence with egotistical, being
Mm,
self-centered and selfish and egotistical is not the same as self-confidence.
yeah.
Unfortunately, all the examples had for a while around me seem to conflate the two. Those that I saw as self-confident, I also saw as really egotistical. So I didn't want that. But of course, they're not the same thing. And which then leads me to another point of being patient with those that who seem to struggle with something I find so easy, and also being very grateful for those who are patient with me while I struggle with something that seems so effortless for them.
Well,
So yeah.
that's the thing, isn't it? Right? Like, because when we're all on a journey. We're all here to experience different aspects of the same thing, right? And something that you said, there's a couple of things like it's about responding rather than reacting. And it's that's that's the part that's the work, because when we react, we're reacting out of our unconscious and our ego and all of those things. But when we respond, we've had that moment to pause, even just for that little tiny moment, to move into, because I teach the 5 steps of alchemy, and the last step is inspired action, right? So, pausing, tuning into what it is that you're here to experience and to move forward into that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's beautiful because it's the rub for me is remembering to do that. It's when I face overwhelm, have stress, and don't feel enough capacity that I forget about that sometimes. But the
Mm.
more I can remember it, the better it is for me, the better it is for everyone around me. And creating these containers and practices like meditation for sure, it makes a bigger container. It allows for more time to pause. And when can pause and slow down, then it can see so many different more choices available and not reacting out of habit patterns that have been, mostly unconscious, whether they are inherited from something from one of our ancestors who something had happened to them and then they adapted or adopted a new way of doing things, and that's got handed down if we don't question it. And yeah, so very important, I find. And this spiritual question, how am I when things don't go my way? Very
Mm.
important question.
Mm.
Yeah.
I One of the things about the pause in, the understanding that I've had for, as I've moved through this process, is when we react, it's because we're in that survival mode, right? We're in that fight flight. We're working from the body, we're working from the mind. And often when we're in that hyper vigilant experience, our energy or our soul is half in, half out. It's not quite in our body. But when we pause, it gives that opportunity for our soul to come in and to really encompass our body. So now we're pausing. And the reason we've got all of those different options in front of us is because now we're accessing all of us. We're accessing our soul, which has got way more information than just our conscious and our unconscious has.
It's so true. I don't know if I can speak for all males or anything, but I know for me, sometimes I'm like a head on wheels. I use this metaphor a lot, and in my experience, women in general just seem to be so much more embodied, not, but it is what it is. And I just notice how helpful it is to be more embodied and connected with the body. It's like a no-brainer, obvious once we know it. And even when I used to drink, that's one of the reasons I drank, because I could actually feel my body more, but
Because
it's
it's
kind of
letting
very,
go, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's that relief of not being in the mind all the time. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's not the relationship we have with our mind too is one that I'm not really impressed with a lot of meditation teachers, because it's almost like, oh, the mind's okay, but here's how to micromanage and get around it without saying that I'm demonizing it and putting it down. So it is a really tricky thing, because the mind has no shame a lot of times too. If we really look closely at our mind. Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because yeah, you're so right. So many people make the mind, the ego, as the baddie, right? Like there's something to um it's the victor, we're the victim to it or whatever. But when you actually recognize that it's on autopilot because it's been conditioned or whatever, and start working with it and saying, hey, this is the way we used to be, but now we're moving into this place, because the mind then starts thinking that it's going to die. So that's why it pushes against. And the whole, its whole premise is to help us stay alive. So when we can recognize or, start working with the mind and saying, hey, it's not that you're going to die, it's actually that we're changing form and you're going to be having a different role, then it goes, okay, I'll come along with you, I'll expand and I'll grow and we'll move together, like, and you start working with it, it's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, I love these different approaches. One I've heard too is having the ego be integrated,
Mm,
because we have to have an ego. I mean, we couldn't really get out of bed and remember our name and
yeah,
go from point A to point B. It's a very necessary thing. It's just when it starts running the whole show
yeah,
and not letting anybody else. It shouldn't be driving the bus. It should be on the
yeah,
bus. It needs to be on the bus, but not driving the bus. I feel.
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
yeah.
And I just want to go back, it just keeps on popping into my head, so I'm going to go back. You were saying, you know as you said, that abuse and trauma is not okay. um we have so much of it. We have so much of it on the planet, right? And it's on from so many different forms, to so many different extremes. And as more people wake up and recognize that we are the solution, right? That we have um, the inner wisdom, we have the intelligence, it's within us and it's not external, the more light will be on the planet, and the more those shadows, those things that are massive distortions in the human psyche, will start coming and breaking apart, and recognizing as a collective that we don't want them anymore, and we're not going to hide from them, because a lot of these things are being hidden and we all sort of know about it in the back of our mind and do nothing about it. But the more we recognize that we are part of the solution, and the solution is to become our authentic self, to love ourselves, to love each other, all of those things, the more that consciousness moves onto the planet, the more those things will just naturally bubble up and be exposed. and break apart. And then we can do the collective healing and the individual healing, you know?
Yeah, love is always the answer for sure. And I think that's a really helpful and skillful way. I mean, some people want to come in, guns blazing, swords blazing, but sometimes what's even more challenging is to make space, invite peace, anchor light, and work with the heart. And I really appreciate, it's like a light bulb went on, because I was wondering quite a bit, like, why are we so conditioned and oriented towards externality, and you really said it really well early on. I mean, it starts in the womb even, or well, when we come out of the womb, right? I mean, actually, when we come out of the womb, and how we're dependent for certain things from the external, and then it's almost like there's either people have capitalized on that and then ran with it and distorted it and taken advantage of that for programming people to, or maybe not, or maybe we didn't know any better, to look outside ourselves more than we need to, when so many resources are within. I know when I started going within and meditating, it was huge. My life turned around almost immediately. I had no idea of the vast innerverse and what's available inside. I mean, it is like a hidden thing. And you talk about, the hidden in the shadows. And that's how, like, some of these secret societies and people in power, they have power because they keep things hidden and they keep secrets,
Yes.
that really don't need to be secrets, in order to gain advantage and power over others for their own selfish ends. And like you said earlier, survivalism, I feel a lot of it's just almost weak and cowardly a lot of times, to just be solely do anything possible to survive. That's not life. That's not living. That's not what we're here to do, I don't think. And then there's so many different survival programs going on too. I mean, look at movies, and people are kind of programmed to go and lack instead of
Yes.
abundance, or that
Yeah.
there's so much limitation when there's not, and there's only these options when there's way more. It's the conditioning. And so, like you say, when we work and internally and open our hearts and tune into these things, it seems like it clears and opens more capacity. And I think the more we can love, the more we're also able to handle uncomfortable truths as well, and be able to face what's hard to face, and come with the skillful action and the heartfeltness that's needed to hold it.
Absolutely. And, you look at ancient texts, like, there's so much wisdom in ancient texts that's been hidden, because all of the ancient texts explain that we have within us, the key is within us. We it's our as within, so without, as above, so below, all of those things. And we have been, we can look at the micro and just our life, or the macro and the bigger picture of how it's all been playing out for millennia, because it's the same process. Is that the internal battle is the same as the external battle. And so it's the whole hero's journey, right? We're born, the whole system is that we're born into the illusion, right? So that's where we start looking at everything is an influence external to us, from the very nature of what, being birthed. And so the whole thing is learning that actually it's not external to us, it's internal to us, And so eventually all of those things are going to come to, like, because as we understand that and start dealing with or working on the mind and the separation within the mind, body, and spirit, the separation within our families and our community, those little tiny things that are in our own micro world, those things will shift the bigger picture. And the faster we do it, the faster the bigger picture shifts.
Well, beautiful. I think that's a great place to start wrapping up. And I think that's a great kind of call to action and a healthy, helpful outlook and aspiration too, for those who are in need of an aspiration and like such an aspiration. I appreciate it. And it seems, I hope it's inevitable, and I think we'll see what effort we need to put where and what just kind of has momentum already, and help nudge what needs to be nudged. So Elizabeth, tell people how they can get in touch with you, what you have going on, if you have products, services, anything else you want to plug, and then leave people with a final message, which you want to take us out on.
So the best place to go to, find me is my website, and it's elizabetheleanor.com, but Eleanor is spelled a little bit differently. It's ELENOR. So elizabetheleanor.com. Yeah, what have I got on? What I do is I do a process of, my business is called the Ascendance Code. So I support people to move through these levels of consciousness. So I've got things that for people that are just starting out, all the way through to people that have already been doing the work and just want that next level of expansion. I do a process called recoding. So I clear from the source, the generational history, anything within the DNA, conditioning from childhood, all of those things. So it works very fast and it's permanent, and it supports us to get rid of that weight, that we're tethered to from the illusion, from all of the conditioning and all of those things. But I've also got a new thing that I've started supporting people with, and that's just manifestation, because as I've been playing with the 5 steps of creation or alchemy, one of the second step is to embody it now. And I find that people find that very hard to be in the present moment because they're so caught up in what's going on in reality. How can I, bring in the love of my life and all of those things? And so I've come up with this process that's so easy. I call it the manifestation key. And so I do that once a year as like a 12-week program. I've got one just about to start. And yeah, so that's a beautiful way to really move into presence and to being in the embodiment of what it is that you want to create in your life. So if I've got anything to end and, any message for those that are still listening, I would say is to actually really just acknowledge that you are the creator of your life. We are making decisions day in and day out that make a difference to not just us, but our environment and the whole world. It ripples out. So take that moment to pause, as we were saying before. Take that moment, and I teach people just that one breath, breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth, will give you enough of a moment to pause and to make a decision of what you want to create rather than in default of how you used to be. What is it you're choosing now instead? That's what I'd love to finish with.
Well, beautiful, Elizabeth. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your experiences and your wisdom and your abilities and your outlook. And may all beings everywhere come to know the most optimal choices for their own well-being and for the well-being of all. May all beings everywhere realize awakening and be free. Bye.